Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, and I'm the legal and government correspondent, and we have a familiar face here as our guest this month, Shannon Zimmerman.
Jamie, great to be here. Thank you very much for having me back.
Absolutely, and for those that haven't watched our prior episodes, I think I've interviewed you at least 3 times already.
I think that's true.
Shannon is our representative in the Assembly, includes a portion of Pierce County, but mostly St. Croix County.
That is correct, yes, and primarily western St. Croix County.
Okay, western St. Croix County, right. Just to be specific, Hudson. It does not include New Richmond or the eastern part of St. Croix County like Baldwin.
That is correct, that is correct.
So, yeah, the district has changed quite a bit. When I ran for it, 25 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
So we're having you back here because it's January 2020. We had a changing governorship, which was in the November of 18 election, which was also your re-election. Happens to be the last time you were on the show, was when you were running for re-election. So there was a session. A lot of people in western Wisconsin don't know much about what happened in this last year. They just heard there was some vetoes, but what we have is a Democratic governor and Republican House, Assembly, and Republican Senate. Tell us a little bit, first of all, did your committee assignments change in this, your second full term?
Absolutely. So in my first term, I was assigned to 5 different committees, and that can, with district responsibilities, that can be a bit daunting at times. And so I would have to frequently coordinate with the committee chairs in terms of all that we had going on. But coming into this, my second term, for my neighbors and the business colleagues and the friends I have in this area, I was thrilled. The Speaker appointed me to the Joint Committee on Finance. So this is my only committee. Now, I wouldn't trivialize it in terms of being just one committee because it is an incredibly intense committee. This is the committee that essentially writes and or shapes our state budget.
So when it comes to budgeting, is the most important committee?
It's the committee, yeah. And I learned so much about the inner workings, the intricacies of all things financial in the state of Wisconsin during this term. It's an MBA in state finance, whether you like it or not.
When it comes to joint finance, that's the thing. You're impacting families, schools, and businesses directly. Unlike maybe some of your other committee assignments where you're dealing with resolutions that say some things, but they don't really direct or impact people directly. So this is some policy mixed in, but mostly dollars being assigned to a policy.
We were very deliberate. I've been, even when Governor Walker was governor, I've been very vocal in saying I don't agree with policy in the budget. Because policy should be handled through bills, and they get heard at public hearings, they go through executive committees, and then they go to the floor and get voted on. This particular cycle, I was very pleased to see actually that we went away from that. The budget was the budget, and one of the first things that we did was kind of strip out the policy so that could be handled in fact separately and differently. So I thought that was the right thing. I will always think it's the right thing regardless of who's in the executive branch, and I hope that it stays that way going forward.
Okay, so you had asked in an email if we're going to have an interview. I know that there will be a political campaign season coming up. We don't want to go there yet because the filing deadlines aren't until, May or June or whatever officially. So let's just focus on what was accomplished in the last year. Let's start with bills that you authored or co-sponsored or played a role in championing.
Yeah, so I'm going to be I'm going to get some of the big ones because I think that they're very important. And for people in Hudson and in River Falls, they simply don't necessarily always know or understand what's going on. So one of the biggest bills, the most impactful bills that I was an influencing part of was our budget bill. Okay.
Right.
So some highlights. First of all, I know that you're very active in supporting our local schools and put your time in there. This past budget, the budget we're operating in, is the largest single investment in K-12 education in the history of the state of Wisconsin. I was also very pleased as a subset of that school funding. We deliberately allocated funds for those with special needs. This can be a really complex issue in our local schools, whether it be our Hudson superintendent, River Falls superintendent. I spend time visiting, and we have, as you know, fantastic schools. So I was really pleased. And the reason I'm such an advocate for education at all levels and you'll hear this come out in a few other, I'm sure, questions and answers, we have a workforce crisis. I mean, this is it's red line. This is the flame is blue. Pick your analogy here, and so education is hugely influential in making sure that we get our great kids, get them good and smart, and send them off to fill our jobs, so that we don't lose those companies. We did a lot for both the UW system, technical colleges. We were able to send, in my opinion, a wonderful amount of funds to those who provide personal care and health care. So as a part of the budget package, I'll start at the high level, we were able to accomplish some things. And oh, by the way, we did that and also sent $500 million in tax relief back to the taxpayers. So, whether people are on one side of the partisan spectrum, who cares? This was a good budget for Wisconsin, and everybody got something. For me specifically, when I think of the bills I authored, I was really fortunate. There was a teacher in River Falls I ran into, and he said, Shannon, I'm having a real problem here. My wife and I want to start a business. And we went to start our business, and Department of Transportation came in and essentially shut us down. Help. Well, what happened is this particular local teacher had a dream of creating a driver's education business. All right, we got a lot of great young kids who are learning to drive, and we want to help them out.
Right.
And so he was officing from his house. Now, just to be clear, this is not a situation where students will ever be in his house. His classroom is on our local roads. Well, under the agency's interpretation of the chapter of law, they found he would had to essentially renovate a substantial portion of his house so that he could office there. It's foolishness. These are the exact things that drive me crazy in Madison. And so I was able to bring a bill forward. It has passed the Assembly. I believe it'll be sent to the governor here, where we will allow for those sort of home offices. Another big one that's very near and dear to me with my workforce background, my focus on workforce, transferability of school credits between the technical colleges and the university. School's not inexpensive. It's valuable, but it's not necessarily inexpensive. And we have a lot of kids who will start in technical college and say, you know what, I want to go to UWRF, or I want to go to Eau Claire, Stout, U of M, whatever the case may be. Well, in Wisconsin, it was a little difficult for those students to transfer credits from the technical college over. We fixed that. That needed to be fixed. It's making school more affordable, but more importantly, Jamie, it's actually getting these youngsters into the workforce sooner, which is, again, the crisis. It's a high-class crisis. With less expense.
Yeah.
They have more money to buy a home in Hudson, or, go out and enjoy a movie in Hudson or River Falls. These are the things that were near and dear. Lastly, I'll just comment on this bill. This bill the governor did sign. It was a bill I authored. Prior to serving in the legislature, I had no experience with families or those with disabilities. And Wisconsin statutes had an archaic chapter where if you could not speak your name when you were voting, you could be technically prohibited from voting in the elections in the state of Wisconsin. So I want you to imagine you have cerebral palsy, you're physically incapable of voting, or speaking your name.
Right.
We fixed that. And I want to give the credit to some local families who opened my eyes to this problem. And I was thrilled to have it. Was bipartisan supported. The governor signed it, and that problem is no longer a problem in the state of Wisconsin. So kind of a caffeinated quick dose of what we've gotten done, but those are some of the things that I will look back on with fondness this session.
Excellent. Are there a few issues that you were trying to advance and just weren't able to get it passed yet? Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 tries. So
There's an issue that is hugely affecting our community. And so we're all keenly aware of some of the opiate and drug issues that we have in our area. And there's an issue called mental health and mental health crisis that is affecting our communities. And no one's immune. It affects everybody. And it's not a stigma anymore because people are finally embracing it and appreciating it for what it really is. This is an area of frustration because this is an area where whether you have a D or an R after your name, you care about this. But in western Wisconsin, this is a serious issue. Sheriff Scott Knutson, Jeff Willems, Gordy Young, the chiefs in our area, they are literally crying out for help. So what happens is this. If we have a resident in our community that exhibits mental health crisis, law enforcement typically is called. That individual is taken to probably a local hospital for immediate assessment on physical issues and so forth. And because we have no area, no regional centers capable of taking these people, these individuals are shackled in the back of a squad car and driven nearly 5 hours to Winnebago, where they receive the care that they need. It's so important. I actually went to the St. Croix County Sheriff's Office, and I asked Sheriff Knudsen to simulate this with me. And I got to tell you, it was nerve-wracking. They put a belt around me, they shackled me, they put me in the back of a squad car. And if you weren't anxious and maybe in crisis, you're going to be when you are in the back of this car. I am very frustrated because in the budget, we put forth $15 million. It's not the ultimate cure, but it was a huge step in the right direction. It got vetoed. The money got redirected to the southern part of the state. And I'm not here to take away from the needs of southern Wisconsin, but I am here to say that I represent, first and foremost, western Wisconsin. And so I'm going to be biased, I'm going to be selfish when I'm advocating and fighting for our needs. What I believe will happen, there's a number of bills circulating right now. We are going to be relentless, again, from a bipartisan perspective, in getting some level of resolution done so that we can take care of mental health crisis.
Would that be getting some type of regional center?
Yeah, there's one of two options. A, we would either, and Eau Claire was proposed, which at first I didn't love, but I called my local chiefs and those in law enforcement. They said, hey, it's pretty good, right? We're used to driving, literally almost across the state of Wisconsin. It will either A, be directed towards a center, which would then have to take in these individuals. The alternative bills that are circulating actually provide a level of bridge funding, because this category of care, most often our local healthcare providers, they lose money on it. And I get it, right? I mean, they got to pay the light bills, and they got to pay taxes and so forth. And so if we can even bridge that in a pilot form, the bottom line is this: we have individuals in North Hudson, River Falls, Roberts, who find themselves in this non-desirable position. Let's not make it worse. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So that would be one of the areas I would say that is a little unfinished for us as we're wrapping up the session here in the early part of this year.
Okay. And when you say wrapping up the session, there's basically how late in the spring does that session go?
Generally we would not go past April. There's a lot of speculation. I don't control the calendar. Leadership would control the calendar. But the speculation right now is that we will likely conclude either in late February or sometime in March. And so there's a flurry of activity right now, myself included. One of the unfinished areas is tax reform. I am hugely advocating for material tax reform.
Good segue there, yes.
Because it ties to our workforce needs. And so that's something that you're going to see popping up in the coming weeks that we're going to try and get some work done on before we conclude session.
Okay. And I didn't know if this would be the time to talk about maybe at the future date when we look forward, because there was a blue ribbon task force looked at how you refund schools, because the way we've been funding schools, frankly, hasn't been too friendly for a Hudson school district. We losing state aid continuously.
And not friendly to the property owners, because many times they see it manifest on their property tax bill, which we don't want to be chasing people out of the state from a housing standpoint either. So I'm happy to go there whenever you'd like.
All right, because I know that our superintendent brought this with him from Iowa, and that is the penny sales tax.
The SAVE program.
Yes, and it dedicates a penny. It'd be a 1 cent sales tax, but it dedicates it to school infrastructure and tax relief, direct tax relief. Could be any kind of proportion, whether it's 20%, 25% tax relief and 75% for infrastructure. But it greatly reduces the referendums and things that like Hudson went through, and now we're making a $7 million payment towards reducing our debt from our last referendum that passed successfully to redo long needed change in our secondary level. But had we had this penny sales tax in place, it would have basically all been paid for.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that people understand something, because I am a business owner in the community. My conservative influences probably started there from a fiscal standpoint. And so I don't want to misrepresent suddenly that, we're just going to add a tax and everything gets better. There's more to it. I'll be as brief as I can. So first of all, what Superintendent Ouellette, and I give him great credit. I mean, he reaches out to me on a very regular basis. I appreciate his ideas, and this was a good one. And so he has some history and ties to Iowa. Ironically, I was on a legislative training session, and I happened to be with a group of Iowa legislators. So I started asking them a ton of questions about this program. But in essence, what it does is this. It's a bit of moving tax around a little bit. So I would argue that it's not necessarily a net increase in tax at all. But what you're describing is a penny tax, it's in the sales category, which also means that we're collecting revenues from people who don't live in Wisconsin now. I like that, right? And so what we do then is we move some of those monies into and they're dedicated exclusively for certain educational expenses, infrastructure, and some of those sort of things, which are also directly paid for by property tax.
Right.
So the net effect of this program is that you end up seeing a reduction. Schools get what they need, but you also see a reduction in property tax, which if you live in St. Croix County, I think I hear it at every second or third door. And so I liked that idea. I talked to the chairman of Ways and Means immediately, Representative John Mocco. John and I love to talk tax and finance. He's a business guy as well. And while there's a runway of work that needs to be done, this is of great interest to us, and I think would have a huge benefit, particularly Hudson and town of Hudson and this area. It's exploding in growth. Property values are increasing dramatically. So that property tax bill is a real number to people.
Exactly. And I think the key point, as you pointed out, in Iowa, when this was first started almost 20 years ago, it was bipartisan. They had a split government. They had Democratic, I think one of the houses was Democrat and maybe a Republican governor. I might have that wrong, but nonetheless, it wasn't like it was all one party.
No.
But when it came up for an extension of that legislation for 20 years, it was all Republican, and they all were in favor of it.
So what that tells me is it works. So I had one person I was sharing, because I was, as we do, I lobby and I start to make sure I'm softening the ground that I'm going to later come back to and ask for support on. And I had one of my colleagues in the House say, well, hold on, Shannon, but if you do it that way, it's unpredictable. We can't be assured of that income. So called my good friends in Iowa and I said, hey, tell me how predictable that revenue stream is. Good years, bad years, good economies, bad economies. And they said, it's pretty stable. Give or take a few $1 million annually, it's pretty darn stable. So we have
pretty
examples.
Equitably distributed.
Yeah.
Instead of some big formula which doesn't help, like in Hudson, it's based on per capita.
Yeah.
So in rural areas where they don't need huge facilities, they still get what they need for the number of students that they have.
That's exactly correct. So, and one of the things, there are people who will say to me, I'm okay with consumption tax. I mean, first of all, I don't like tax, period, but I do understand that there are some, as a base level of government funding that we need. And they say, well, it's regressive. And I kind of respond back and I go, you know what though, here's how I view this. We always talk about equitability and so forth when it comes to tax, and there's those who will argue and say, well, the rich have creative ways of getting around it. When you go to consumption taxes, if you go spend a whole bunch more money than I do, you're going to pay more.
Right.
But for the retiree on Vine Street in Hudson, who's spending less, they're going to pay less. So I struggle with the argument that it's not a reasonable way to approach tax, and that's why I don't run from it.
Right, and I've heard that people, well, if you can afford the big house, you can afford, but it's not necessarily always favorable to seniors, especially when you're trying to keep seniors in their house as long as you can.
Yeah.
And so fixed income people, I think, would appreciate that. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. It's more of a future-oriented thing. Looking back again over this last year, give us some examples of bipartisan action that you saw. Because I know you had the one committee, Joint Finance. You said that there's quite a bit that is done bipartisanly there.
So first of all, I'll start with, I had a bill. It was an investment-related bill. Wisconsin, for reasons I'll never understand, had an exception which was actually harmful to the insurance industry and so forth. And there's a Democrat representative. His name is Representative Jason Fields. Jason has an investment business background. So I sat down. I'm like, hey. I explained everything to him. He got it. We both loved it. We brought the bill together. We brought it forward together. So bipartisan effort, working together, and the governor signed it. So I mean, that's my personal example. I would also say on the budget itself, right? And there's a lot of haggling and arguing that goes on back and forth on the budget, but there's also a lot of work, and this is happening in joint finance. It's a smaller subset of the Assembly that convenes, and the Senate, the legislature that convenes to do this. And I could tell you many times, we'd step back from the microphones and I would lean over to, Representative Chris Taylor or Evan Goyke, who are Democrats to my right, and, we would debate, politely, professionally. It's not the theater that people see sometimes on national television. That's not Wisconsin. And so that's one of the biggest things that kind of drives me crazy, is that there's more bipartisan work happening. And forgive me, this stat could be off just a little bit, but I want to say it's either 93 or 97, I could have my numbers mixed up, of the bills that have gone through and been passed during this session were voted bipartisan.
Okay.
So when you open Facebook, I bet you wouldn't think that, but the reality is it's true.
Okay. And you mentioned that there's joint finance. It's kind of a large committee because it's made up of people from the Assembly and the Senate. How many total, just to give the folks some idea?
Yeah, there's 16 members in total on joint finance. 12 of them, the majority will hold 12 seats, and then those are split 6 and 6, 6 from the Senate, 6 from the Assembly. I am one of the 6 in the Assembly, and I will tell you again, selfishly, and I'm okay with this, from our hometown part and our part of the state, that's a great thing, because that is a room where a lot of debate occurs, and I am proud to be able to represent our unique needs in that room and within our budget.
Yeah, I think I know that before you, Sheila Harsdorf was on joint finance,
Yep.
and so having somebody in this area is really critical. Now, that makeup, and I know that these rules have been in place for a while, but do you know why the 12 and 4 split? Why not say 10-6? The fact that,
I don't know.
I mean, is there any time where you have to have a 3/4 vote or a 2/3 vote?
A supermajority. That would happen in a veto override.
Sure, but that's of each house. That's not of just the joint finance, or is
Joint
that?
finance actually last week had its first veto override, which required both Democrats and Republicans to come together. So it's the first time it's happened this session, but it happened.
Okay.
And that's a great example of the legislature, just saying, hey, this is just the right thing to do. And it's not a reflection or to say that, oh, Governor Evers is evil. No, not at all. He's a nice man. It's the legislature, I consider the people's house, right? Probably understanding more so that this was something that needed to get done. So bipartisan work does in fact happen.
And speaking of partisan and bipartisan, just looking at how people identify themselves and looking at Congress, 40 years ago, there was actually a pretty large segment. It wasn't a plurality, but a pretty large segment that identified themselves as moderate, either progressive Republicans or conservative Democrats. Now, you rarely hear those two terms together anymore, and now I think the number of people that identify themselves moderate is down to 1 or 2 out of 400 and some in Congress.
Yep.
So what I'm wondering is, do you have any examples of voting, not necessarily 100% with your party? The person that I think of who was kind of my idol growing up was William Proxmire.
Yeah.
He only voted with the Democrats about 60% of the time, 40% of the time, because he was a conservative when it came to fiscal issues and so forth. So how do you have any stories like that where maybe you bucked the party leadership, if you will?
So as a business owner and a person who was blessed to work with so many great people in this community, one of the philosophies I've long shared is that when we're in the huddle, that's where we debate the play. That's where we discuss, we argue, we do whatever is necessary. But when we break from the huddle, if you will, we run the play. And so for me personally, I am not about big theater. It's not who I am, and nor will it ever be who I am. So I'll give you a couple examples. Not necessarily in voting against the party, although that does happen. Certainly, I think every vote that comes up, there's usually a few that may cross over. But it's areas of importance. So joint finance. Each caucus, if each group, each party meets privately as we go through, pages and pages and pages of paper. And we disagree. And there's a couple areas this particular cycle when it came to education funding, special education funding and so forth, where we had some disagreement. And I remember being on my phone with constituents, teachers, and there was a few family members in the area that have been adversely affected in these ways. And I remember, for example, one of my school board members, I remember calling him up and saying, don't inflate the number. Tell me what you have to have. Tell me what your basement is. And you know, they let me know that. They're being straight with me. They're not overinflating it. And so I went back in that room, and not with the cameras or the microphones, and argued fiercely for this position because I believed in it. I believed that it was the right thing to do, not only for our communities, but something I'm passionate about, which is our future workforce. Because if we don't take care of that, where are the companies going to go? And when companies go, then families are affected, and so on and so on.
Well, right. And when we're not there in our school district yet, but you know, the day could come where we have to do cutting. And when you have to do cutting, one of the things, programs that are right now benefiting students and saving families money is getting college credit in high school.
Yeah.
And we want to be able to do that, but to do that, you have to have teachers that are qualified. They have
Yep.
to have master's levels, education or higher, and so forth. And so to do that, you end up paying them a little bit more,
Yep.
but you're getting that education. Then in the long run, there's savings because they're
Yeah.
not having to pay extra tuition. So
I cannot speak more favorably about the Hudson Raider Works program. River Falls has its own version of the same thing. This is not the shop class that I attended.
Right.
This is a class where these young students, and I have visited Hudson every year since I've been in office, and I'm watching literally some of these youngsters grow, and now they're seniors, and I've watched them just blossom into, I mean, they're doing the communications with the local businesses as they work through their project, understanding their specifications, building it to a high degree of quality, ensuring customer experience and satisfaction was there. Those are real employable skills, not to mention CNC, CAD, welding, all these other skills. There's a high school student, he's a senior, he has the ability to make $27 an hour coming out with the skills and the certificates that he's earned at Hudson High School. Right. That's more than just a high school diploma now. You can support yourself or a family on that, and that's just getting started. So, look, I agree. I think that we don't want to get to the point. I ask the schools, be frugal. And they are. I mean, we can't inflate stuff, and you know, this is the taxpayers' money. I am a steward of that money. And I have to date found that our local schools do a really good job in being stewards of that precious dollar.
We're preaching to the choir here a little bit, but you know, I appreciate the focus on education, but some people would say, and we've only got 3 minutes left here,
Yeah.
What about the other areas of state policy? Because other things that suck up the money from the budget, the prisons and healthcare, and the roads. And I wanted to speak specifically about the roads because I've seen a little bit of almost a flip-flop, if you will, from the Speaker of the Assembly, where when it was all Republicans, he was advocating for some type of increase in the gas tax.
Yep.
Now that he's contemplating maybe running for governor or whatever, not hearing that so much from him. So what do you see the future? Because part of it is the consumption of gas is actually down. Fuel consumption is more, people are being more gas economically friendly.
Yep.
And everything. And there was a time when the gas tax wasn't used strictly for roads. So what do you see as the answer? Because people appreciate the fact that now Wisconsin's not in the top 4 in taxes anymore. Now we're getting closer to that middle tier.
Yep.
But a lot of people, I hear anyway, talk about, and have traveled around the state, about how our roads have taken a beating over the last 8-10 years. So what do you see as a cure?
No different than how we would approach a business-related problem, right? You can't isolate one specific issue and say, I'm going to solve this, and without having context for everything else. And that's an important point because you can't just talk about transportation without consideration for healthcare, for education, for Department of Corrections, and that is a big, big number that we spend in the state on corrections, for example.
Right.
So, first of all, I think that it's about finding balance, but I've said this over and over again. To me, it's kind of simple math, right? First of all, we are living in what I think is probably the best economy in my 47 years on this planet. And we need to make hay when the sun shines, and this is the time to be doing reforms. But if you're going to fix transportation, you can't do it in a silo. You have to do it while remedying everything else, which in my opinion warrants material tax reform. Tax reform that doesn't just change what we have today, but serve as a recruitment tool to others. If we had, for example, I'll get extreme for a moment, if we had low to no income tax, you would have people from Minnesota moving over, Illinois for sure they would be coming over, Michigan and other surrounding border states. The more human beings we put in the state of Wisconsin filling our jobs, because we have a high vacancy rate right now with our aging population, it's a broader tax base. We're going to collect more revenues just by sheer numbers and not just by raising tax, which I don't want to do. When the revenue rises, you have the opportunity then to be addressing transportation in a more creative way, healthcare in a better way.
So you see the gas tax is just one piece to a bigger puzzle.
Has to be, in my opinion. Okay. And I'll say this about the gas tax. I just don't like it. I get it. I understand why it's been there, but I don't like it because the gas tax, to your point, we are seeing more fuel-efficient vehicles. It's unsustainable. It's not going to last. So now is the time when the sun is out and the days are good that we should be thinking about this. Don't try and solve the world's problems when we're in the darkest days. Now, in my opinion, is the time to be solving these issues.
Or maybe establishing a rainy day fund?
By constitutional direction, we're required to do that, and because our revenues continue to surpass projections, our rainy day fund has now surpassed $600 million, which some could argue some of that should go back to the taxpayer, which we did send some back. But the reality is that it's prudent, right?
What goes up comes down.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, this won't last forever, but we're enjoying it while we can.
All right, very good. I see that our time is up, and just as we finish, is there a website that somebody can come to learn what you're doing currently and for the rest of this legislative session?
Absolutely. So if you simply go to the Wisconsin State Assembly homepage, every one of all of our representatives, myself included, are there. When you click on my name, all the bills I've authored, co-authored, sponsored, and so forth, all right there. You can click on them, read about them, and then areas.
So that's Shannon Zimmerman.
Yep. So you just look me up on the
Or
Wisconsin
Assembly District number?
30.
And so, is it by district number as well?
It is by district number as well, so it's pretty easy. Or what I would tell people, if you're lost and need help, call 608-266-1526. That is my office number. A lot of people call it. I would encourage it.
All right, 266-1526 with that Madison area code.
You got it.
All right, very good. Shannon, thanks a lot
Jamie,
for coming on the show again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You bet. And I appreciate the folks that follow this program. They come up to me, tell me they watch it, and I hope you learn something. And I really encourage you to stay in touch with your representatives so that you know what's going on. And thank you for watching this show. I'm Jamie Johnson. Keep watching.